All right, so we're going to talk about our next system. We've done the integumentary system, the skeletal system. Now we're on to the muscular system. And the muscular system is all about, as you guessed it, muscles. So what is the function of the muscular system? It's any kind of movement, from moving, bulk movement of just moving your body, running, walking, to moving materials to the digestive system, right, swallowing, smiling. There are thousands of just different movements that we do on just without even thinking, subconsciously every day. Breathing, movement of breathing, your heart moving. All these things require muscles. And we talked about in the integumentary system the shivering. And as you shiver, you have these tiny muscles embedded in the skin that allow you the shivering muscle movement there. Helps with heating. All right, so that's the major function of the muscular system in movement, any kind of movement. And yeah, like this a nice picture there, huh? All right, so some of the different muscle tissues involved here. There are three different types of muscle tissues you can see here. And they're either going to be voluntary, which means you control that movement of muscle. You actually control and physically use that muscle consciously. And then there's the involuntary kind, where your brain and nervous system kind of take over, and they do it without you having to think about it consciously. And so you have the three different types. You have skeletal muscle, which, as the name implies, is it's connected to bone, and it's going to be voluntary. Skeletal muscle is voluntary. You move it, and you will it to move, and you can not move it. Smooth muscle is going to be kind of any kind of it's involuntary, first off, so you don't really have control over that for the most part. And smooth muscle, any kind of internal movement is going to be controlled by a smooth muscle. So your digestive system, your intestines is moving all that waste down is going to be smooth muscle. Your stomach, as it churns, the food you've eaten, that's going to be caused by a smooth muscle. And then we have cardiac muscle, which is specific to the heart, and it is involuntary as well. It'd be kind of hard if you had to think about pumping your heart for every beat. You wouldn't be doing much else during the day, right? So that's involuntary, totally self-controlled through the nervous system. Another interesting thing about the cardiac muscle is it's self-contracting. It will contract on its own. When I go back to the Indiana Jones, the Temple of Doom video where the guy's heart gets pulled out and it just beats. The cardiac muscle will beat as long as it has energy and ATP to use it. And you look at the microscopic slides here, just the different looks under a microscope of these muscles. One kind of cool thing about skeletal muscles, it can be multinucleated. Right? It's a long cell with multiple nuclei. That's pretty sweet. And then you got the different striations here of muscle, which we'll talk about here in a second. And you're never mind. Moving on. All right, what is it made of? All right, muscle tissue is made up of these muscle fibers. These muscle fibers are a collection of these filament bundles called myofibrils. Myofibrils. Right, so you have this collection of bundled fibers, right, and they're going to work together. And there's a lot of stuff on this page, but I pulled off because it was looked like the best diagram out there that I could find for this. And our main concern here will be the myosin and the actin. It's the myosin and the actin in these two proteins. There's a thick myosin and a thin, the actin, which are going to move, and the movement of these two is what's going to cause the muscle contraction. So all this stuff here, you have the bound fibers, all right, and then you got these fibrils. And if you zoom in on the fibrils, you're going to end up with these pieces, the actin and the myosin, that work together to actually cause the muscle contraction. And within each muscle fiber, you've got all these bundles, and they're all contained with actin myosin. You have them acting all at the same time. That's where you're going to end up with your strength. Don't worry so much about the I band, H zone, M line, all this stuff. But the sarcomere is, that's kind of the one area. You kind of zoom in and you get the muscle contraction. And that's what we're going to talk about. But for now, just keep in mind that, with the main component of all this muscle tissue, these bundles together, and you're going to have myosin and actin. All right, now let's talk about these two proteins, the thick and the thin, myosin and actin, that cause muscle contraction. So let's talk about muscle contraction. All right, so muscle contraction, we're going to just show you this video real quick, and then I will be back.
During contraction of a muscle, calcium ions bind to troponin. This moves tropomyosin out of the way and uncovers binding sites for myosin on the actin myofilaments. ADP and phosphate are attached to the myosin head from the previous cycle of movement. The myosin heads attach to the exposed binding sites on the actin myofilaments to form cross bridges, and the phosphate is released. Energy stored in the head of the myosin myofilament is used to move the head. This causes the actin myofilament to slide past the myosin myofilament. The ADP is released from the myosin head as it moves. The bond between actin and the myosin head is broken when an ATP molecule binds to the myosin head. The ATP is broken down to ADP and phosphate, releasing energy, which is stored in the myosin head and will be used later for movement. The head of the myosin molecule returns to its upright position and is ready to bind to actin again. If calcium ions are still present, the entire sequence is repeated.
All right, so to recap what they were saying in the video, you start with the myosin, and it's attached to the actin, and it has the ADP. And as that ADP is as it's released, that causes the actin to change shape. Sorry, the myosin to change shape, and that pulls the actin down. So the ADP attached to the myosin is released. The myosin changes shape, and that causes the actin filament then to be pulled down. After that happens, ATP is attached to the myosin, which then causes it to detach and then revert back to its original shape, as the ATP and then it loses the phosphate. There's this ADP phosphate complex here. So we have ADP phosphate. ADP is released from the myosin, causes the myosin to move, and then this myosin gets ATP, detaches. The ATP loses the phosphate to the myosin and it reverts back to its original shape, attaches, loses ADP, pulls the actin, detaches, ATP is attached, ATP loses the phosphate, goes back up and attaches to the actin. So it's this nice cycle, that happens over and over again, and in every muscle contraction. The myosin is pulling the actin through the action of ATP. One more time. The myosin attaches to the actin. ADP is lost. It pulls the actin. The myosin then gets ATP, which then causes this cross bridge to break. The ATP then loses a phosphate, which makes it ADP, adenosine diphosphate, which then allows it back to attach to the energy position. So that's the action of a muscle contraction. There's more to it than that, but for us in this, I think that'll be sufficient. All right, so how does this cause movement? And ultimately, the movement is what we're looking for in this contraction. All right, and a word you should know is a tendon. All right, tendons are connective tissues that join muscle to bone. And with movement, and we're talking specifically here to skeletal muscle. With skeletal muscle, there's always they work in pairs. All right, well, one is contracted, the other one will be relaxed. And here's the bicep-tricep pair. All right, if you flex your bicep, right, that extends the tricep. All right, that becomes more relaxed. And then if you pull your arm out and relax the bicep, you can get that tricep in the back, on the back side of your arm, to contract. And it's through this, all of these muscle fibers, right, bundled together, that give you your strength. And that is where I'm going to stop today. But again, this is an important tendon, and ligament can often get confused. They're very similar, so keep that in mind. And enjoy.